The anticipation for F1's first test with brand new cars and engines is higher in 2026 than ever before, but you can't watch it happen. Nobody can. The first 2026 test, set to feature all 11 teams, including new entry Cadillac in Spain at the end of January, is being kept almost completely private. The teams can run on a maximum of 3 days out of the 5 from Monday, January the 26th to Friday, January the 30th. But beyond those teams, and whoever's necessary to actually run the test, Barcelona will basically be closed off. And yes, that includes the media, so we're sharing in the disappointment. The first test is a major moment in any new season, let alone one where the cars are changing this much. There is huge interest in how they look and sound, and the inevitable desire to get the first clues of who might be on top and who is in trouble. For unconvincing reasons, the teams have poured cold water on that excitement. This was supposedly requested and organised by the teams themselves, but testing is governed strictly by the regulations. So since when have the FIA and F1 let the teams call the shots? If it is just the teams responsible for this, it is strange and disappointing that they're too scared to give people the chance to know what happens and have been allowed to keep things so private. The main argument we've heard tends to be that testing is meant to be just that, testing. So teams should be able to go about their business in private as they once did back in the day of in-season testing and private tests being the norm. This isn't necessarily wrong in principle, but it doesn't really stand up to scrutiny, especially in the modern day. Many teams will probably shake down their cars in advance anyway, so there's an opportunity for some private running. Audi ran its car for the first time on the 9th of January, for crying out loud. And there is a way of doing the test to minimise the coverage, for example not having every single moment televised live and reducing what data or media have to work with. That was actually the norm until fairly recently. Even the last time F1 rolled out brand new cars in 2022, there was a less extreme version of what's happening this year. 4 years ago, stakeholders tried to frame the first test at Barcelona as more of a 3-day shakedown, with Bahrain hosting the official pre-season tests. Most people thought this was just because Bahrain wanted and paid for the honour of the real tests, but the reason didn't really matter. Speaking selfishly, media was still able to attend that Spain running, so we didn't miss out and neither did the fans, as we could still provide extensive coverage. There was a key difference in how they were managed, as the Spain test only had basic access and timing available on site, whereas Bahrain was what we've become used to in recent years, hosted as a full F1 event with extensive broadcast coverage, live timing, press conferences and individual media sessions. What F1's doing this year, going much more private and closed off and effectively trying to make Barcelona a secret test, is overkill. Limiting testing coverage is not necessarily a bad thing, given extensive round-the-clock live broadcasting is usually excessive. While many like to have the option of watching testing, it gets boring very quickly. That's not really the point though. Taking the option to follow the first test away to an unprecedented extent in the modern era is a negative development and comes across slightly cowardly. It seems to be driven by teams wanting to avoid embarrassment in case things go wrong and reflects an ecosystem that is obsessed with controlling a positive message. But maybe the ghosts of F1's last big rules change are partly to blame. Most teams and manufacturers don't have happy memories of the last time they headed into pre-season testing with all new engines. On the first day of running at Jerez 12 years ago, the teams managed a grand total of 93 laps between them. McLaren didn't even get out of the garage, and Marussia was in transit to the circuit after completing its car late. A total of 2 hours and 20 minutes passed before someone completed anything other than an installation lap. That was Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, which ended up in the wall at turn 1 thanks to a front wing failure after logging 18 laps. Even day 1 pace setter Kimi Raikkonen caused a red flag when his Ferrari stopped on its very first lap, while Red Bull Renault struggles were very clear as it managed just 3 slow laps without a time. Things did improve as the test progressed, but it seemed inconceivable that just 6 weeks later it would be possible for this group of cars to run a credible Grand Prix. Even once pre-season testing was completed, there were major doubts. Renault's problems were so bad that neither Red Bull nor Toro Rosso had pulled off a successful practice start prior to heading to Australia. To make matters worse, there was widespread criticism of the perceived lack of engine noise, and this all added up to the new rules era making a very unconvincing start. And yet, come the first race, 15 cars crossed the finish line, even if one of them, Marussia's Jules Bianchi, was not classified as a finisher. Even Red Bull managed to get second place on the road with Daniel Ricciardo, although he was later excluded for fuel flow irregularities. Still, the pre-season struggles were a PR disaster, and F1 as a whole didn't do a good job of telling the technical story of this remarkable will turn around as teams and manufacturers quickly got on top of the new power units. It's not clear whether lessons have been learned, and maybe that fear prompted an overcorrection now. There is a lot more attention on F1 now than in 2014, so a humiliating first test would be exposed to far greater scrutiny and even ridicule. But is such a repeat even likely? What makes the secrecy of the first 2026 test so frustrating is how unnecessary it seems to be. Yes, there have been rumours for a long time that one engine manufacturer, Mercedes, is in a really good place for the new rules. And we've had the news that Mercedes and Red Bull powertrains are exploiting something that other engine manufacturers aren't, potentially locking in an early advantage. But there haven't exactly been horror stories of multiple manufacturers struggling to get their engines to work reliably on the dynos. The new engines are a big challenge, but not to the same degree as 12 years ago. Nobody's really expecting a major disaster or concerns about what kind of farce the season opener could be, though there are some obvious worries. The engine's becoming more of a 50-50 split between internal combustion and electric power makes for a tough pursuit of performance and reliability. The reduction in car weight is something that teams will struggle to meet with their car designs. New advanced sustainable fuels bring fresh reliability peril as well. It's probable, not just possible, that cars will spend large chunks of time in the garage during the Barcelona test. There will probably be stoppages on track, maybe even the odd slightly dramatic failure, and potentially few laps completed to start with. Even Mercedes, expected to be a or the benchmark manufacturer, thinks it's going to be so difficult to make the cars reliable early on. That's because of the scale of change and the different technologies involved, resulting in cars and engines not yet running the real world outside of simulated conditions. So a team or two in crisis, a major manufacturer with egg on its face, several drivers knowing immediately they're in for a shocking year, it's all possible. We can understand why teams ideally wouldn't want TV cameras fixated on their cars and garages during these peak moments of stress, or people listening out for the sound of electric saws firing up behind a closed door. And F1 obviously doesn't want the first 2026 narratives to stick to be ones of crises or concern, but F1's meant to be difficult, and all the stakeholders should have a little more faith that most fans will understand that. They should also trust in the underlying strength of the championship to withstand legitimate criticism of anyone underperforming to start with. The main reason this is disappointing is it ends up being a massive missed opportunity. It's not how F1's been in a long time. The tests have become a massive part of the story, so blocking out the rest of the world from the very first one is not a good move. It's also just not how the world works, especially not the world that F1's embraced. Access and content is more important nowadays than ever, and F1's main currency is getting as much attention as possible and appealing to more people in more ways. Cutting off access to what would otherwise be one of the most hyped events of 2026 is a weird move that diminishes F1's returns. It also shortchanges fans, both in terms of how much they can take in themselves and where they get their information from. We understand it was at least insisted on the teams that F1 could have a skeleton crew there to record quick snippets from the drivers and senior team and technical personnel, and teams will be sharing some updates themselves. But hyper-curated, controlled updates aren't particularly transparent, and real information is being restricted. Things can't always be perfect and positive. If you're just being told everything's amazing, it's hard to work out what's actually good. Whereas if people front up to something being bad, you're more likely to believe them when the message is more positive. Of course, we're not viewing this entirely altruistically. Selfishly, it's an unwelcome step for us too. But it's genuinely important for the bad stuff to get reported properly. And the funny thing is, it won't stop the bad stuff leaking out anyway. In fact, it's only more likely to put anything like that more in the spotlight because it will stand out even more. Meanwhile, a bigger than normal testing vacuum will be filled by extreme speculation, which won't do teams any favours. There is an argument that by doing this, the interest and anticipation for the first real test in Bahrain will be heightened. What's more likely is that what we all get from Spain will be unsatisfying and won't be fully compensated by Bahrain either, because nothing hits quite like the first test.